Happy Wednesday afternoon from Pasadena Humane. Thank you everyone for joining us. If this is your first time here, my name is Michelle. I am the outreach coordinator here at Pasadena Humane, and it is one of my main jobs to bring all of these wonderful webinars to you. Today, we are joined by Travis DeLano. How are you, Travis?
Doing great.
So Travis is not only an amazing volunteer for our dog programs for the last few years, but he is also a graduate student at Caltech who is studying chemistry. So we can all keep our fingers crossed for him. Hopefully by this time next year, he will actually have doctor in front of his name. So is that the goal, Travis?
Yes, very much so.
Very much so. Travis is very knowledgeable in the field of chemistry, and he's going to share with us today all about vaccines, what they are, what's in them, how they work, why they're important in relation to our pets and their health. So before we get started, I am going to go over some webinar reminders for those of you who are joining us for the very first time today. Okay. So this is an audio visual presentation. So even though you can see and hear us, we cannot see nor hear you. And with that in mind, please use the question box on the right-hand side of your screen. We're going to get to the questions mostly at the end. So if you can wait until then to ask, Travis may answer it, but I do understand that there are times where you have a thought on your brain and you just need to get it out. Like I said, today we are going to be talking about the science behind vaccines, what they are, why they're important, what's in them, how they work. In a couple of weeks, we will be talking with our very own wildlife manager, Lauren Hamlet, on coexisting with coyotes and peafowl. And in September, we will be talking with our very own behaviorist, Quinn Pickering, on enrichment with your critters. Okay. This webinar is recorded, so if you miss it at any time, you can always go back when you get the recording tomorrow afternoon. If you enjoy watching this webinar as much as Travis and I enjoy giving it to you, you can make an impact to our shelter animals by using this donation link, and I will put that in the chat box as well. And without further ado, go ahead and take it away, Travis.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, let me just close out. Okay, well, thank you so much for the kind introduction, Michelle. As Michelle mentioned, I'm Travis DeLano, and I am a graduate student at Caltech. And today I'm very excited to tell you a little bit about the science behind vaccines. So I'll start with a little outline of what we're going to go over today. So we'll begin by talking about what exactly a vaccine is, and then we'll talk about how vaccines actually work. After talking through the process of how they work, we'll go over what the different components are in the vaccine, and then talk about why they're so important for our animals. We'll then talk about the specific vaccines that are available at Pasadena Humane, and finally, we'll talk about a few possible side effects. So to start, we have a question about what a vaccine is.
So I've put the poll up on the screen, and we'll give everybody some time to answer. So it's almost looks like a 50-50 mix, Travis, of an antibody that provides acquired immunity or an antigen that provides acquired immunity. And I'm going to close that poll now.
Okay, those are both excellent guesses. So the definition we have here for a vaccine is a little complicated, and we're going to walk through it in parts. So a vaccine is an antigen that is administered to a person or an animal that provides acquired immunity to an infectious disease. So let's walk through these in a few parts. So the first of these, and the easiest one, is infectious disease. So we're probably familiar with this, and this is any sort of illness that's caused by invasion of a person or an animal's body by something like a bacteria or a virus. And they can really often be spread from animal to animal or animal to people or people to animals. And this could include anything from rabies to chickenpox to influenza. There's all sorts of different infectious diseases out there. The next part of this is the antigen, and we're going to talk a lot about antigens today. And as a basic definition, it's some structure on the outside of a virus or a bacteria that can be targeted by the immune system. So it's unique to a particular pathogen. The last part of this is acquired immunity. And this is a really amazing thing that bodies are able to do, where the immune system can remember antigens that it's seen before, and that helps them fight off the same infection much easier the second time we encounter it. We'll walk through how this actually works in the next few slides. But before we talk about how a vaccine works, I think it's really helpful to think about what happens if we get exposed to some sort of pathogen and we're not vaccinated. So we have our healthy cells here, and suddenly a pathogen shows up, this little orange guy here. The pathogen starts doing some sort of damage to our cells. It's infecting our cells, and that makes our cells unhealthy. And we have some sort of disease, and this comes with all sorts of different symptoms depending on the disease. So it could be as minor as a runny nose, or it could be life-threatening. When this pathogen shows up, we have a system in our body called the immune system that really does not want this pathogen to be here. So it sees that there's something unusual happening in the body and sends out these immune cells, in this case in yellow, to investigate what's happening. So he's going to pull out his figurative magnifying glass and try to figure out what this pathogen is and how it can get rid of it. And the key thing that it identifies is these little triangles, which are antigens, on the outside of the pathogen. And you'll notice that those triangles are on the pathogen, but they're not on our body's cells already. So it's going to allow the immune system to recognize these invaders and not accidentally target the cells in our body that we need. After investigating what's going on, which is a process that can take several days, the immune cell is going to develop these Y-shaped structures, which are called antibodies. And these antibodies are going to be a perfect match for the antigen on the outside of this invading parasite or virus. And we can see that the triangle of the antigen fits perfectly into the Y shape of our antibody. And this is then going to allow the immune system to either remove or destroy this pathogen from our body. And you'll see that our cells have now gone back to being healthy, and you're able to heal from the damage that was done. This next step is really important. After we've gotten rid of the pathogen that was in our cells and we're all happy and healthy again, our immune system holds on to these gray cells that are called memory cells. And you'll see that they still have this Y-shaped antibody on it. And that means that it still specifically remembers the triangles on the outside of our pathogen. So let's say it's 6 months later and we're exposed to that same pathogen again. Instead of having to come in and investigate for several days to figure out what's going on, all the while you have symptoms of the disease, your body immediately knows, I know how to get rid of this pathogen. We already have the antibodies for it. And now you're going to be able to recognize the pathogen and remove it without there being an infection of your cells. So on one slide, to walk through this kind of step by step, we start with healthy cells and they get attacked by a pathogen. And this causes a disease that has various symptoms associated with it, which makes our cells unhappy. The immune system senses that there's something unwanted in the cell and responds, and it takes some time for it to figure out what to do about this pathogen. During this time, you're experiencing the symptoms of the disease. What the immune system figures out is how to make antibodies, these Y-shaped proteins, that can specifically target the specific pathogen that's in the body and mark it to either be killed or removed from the cells. And this allows the infection to clear from the body, and our cells are able to go back to being happy and healthy. The really important part here is that memory cells remain, and they still have the antibodies on them, and they still remember, why they're called memory cells, how to fight off this specific pathogen. So a few months later or a year later, if we get re-exposed to the same pathogen, our body is able to immediately know how to deal with it without any sort of infection happening. So this is the process that happens if we have not had a vaccine. So let's walk through these steps again and see what changes if we start with a vaccine instead of starting with an infection. So once again, we start with our healthy cells. And in this case, we have the vaccine coming in, which is in purple here. And it looks a lot like the pathogen that infected us last time around. But this vaccine has been changed compared to the pathogen so that it can't infect us. It doesn't allow us to get sick. Even though it's not making us sick, the immune system still doesn't like this unknown thing in the body. So it sends in these cells to look around and figure out what's going on. And this, again, can take several days, but we're not getting sick during these several days. Much like when we were infected in the first example, we develop antibodies. They're going to be essentially the same antibodies, and they recognize the triangle antigens on the outside of our vaccine. They're then able to remove the vaccine from the body. And the really important part here, once again, is that we still have these memory cells at the end. These memory cells specifically recognize the antigen on the vaccine. And if we get exposed to the actual pathogen, not the vaccine again, we already know how to deal with it. So your memory cells in the immune system will be able to target the pathogen and remove it before you're able to be infected, even though this is the first time you've actually seen the pathogen before. And the key through all of this is you'll notice that our cell stays smiling and happy the entire time because there isn't an infection, there isn't a disease that's happening. So let's go back to our definition of a vaccine and see if it makes a little bit more sense now that we've walked through how it works. So the vaccine is the antigen. In this case, it's the little triangles on our purple vaccine here that's administered to a person or an animal that provides acquired immunity. And acquired immunity really has a lot to do with these memory cells that we talked about. And it provides acquired immunity to some sort of infectious disease. And in this case, our infectious disease is this orange guy. So the real key difference between vaccination and just getting a disease for the first time is that if you are vaccinated, the person or the animal doesn't have to get the disease, but still has that acquired immunity for the future. So both routes that we went through end up in the same place of having these memory cells that are able to recognize a pathogen. But in the second case, if you are being vaccinated rather than exposed to the disease, you don't have to go through the symptoms of the disease or have the risk of having consequences long-term or death from the disease. So our next question is, what's in a vaccine?
Okay. So I've gone ahead and put this poll up on your screen. You've got a few different choices that you can make. So we have Travis, there's a couple of different answers that are being highlighted, but one stands out more than another. So a majority of the audience is saying antigen stabilizers diluted.
Excellent. That is the correct answer. And we'll walk through what each of those different things are a little bit. So the most important ingredient in any vaccine is the antigen, which I think makes sense based on our definition of a vaccine. And there are a lot of different kinds of antigens and different sort of technologies that are used in different vaccines, but I'm going to talk about 3 of the most important and common ones today. So the first type of vaccine I want to talk about is called an attenuated vaccine. And this is made of a live microorganism that has had its infectious properties disabled. So it's still a live bacteria or virus, but its ability to actually infect your cells and to cause a disease has been removed. The next type is called an inactivated vaccine. And this is made of microorganisms that have been partially destroyed and therefore killed by heat or chemicals or radiation or something like that. And these also aren't able to infect a person and give them a disease because they're dead. The third type we have here is called a subunit vaccine. And this is made of just one small part of a microorganism. So in this case, it's just made of our little triangles that the body is able to recognize. So I said that an antigen is the most important part of our vaccine, but there's a lot of other things that are in the vial. The second thing we'll talk about, because we've already discussed the antigen, is something called an adjuvant. And this is in some vaccines, but definitely not all vaccines. And it's a chemical that causes an increased immune response. So when that pathogen came into our cell in the little cartoons we went through, we have the yellow immune cells with their magnifying glasses come in to try to figure out what's going on. And the adjuvant is something that basically holds up a big sign and says, immune system, send more cells to figure out what's going on here. Something is happening. So this can increase the immune response to the vaccine. The next thing that's in some vaccines is a preservative. And this is especially common if you have a vaccine where there are multiple doses in one vial. And this makes sure that the second and the third and the fourth dose stay just as fresh as the first dose when they're removed from the vial. There are also stabilizers in many vaccines, and this helps them last longer in storage so that we can use them for longer, and also sometimes helps the liquid on the inside from sticking to the sides of the vial. The next component is a surfactant, and this is something that keeps everything in solution. So a good kind of analogy is if you make a salad dressing with oil and vinegar and you shake it up, it'll all seem kind of like it's one liquid, but if you let it sit around for a while, it'll split back into 2 layers. And the surfactant is going to stop them from splitting back into 2 layers. The next thing that's in vaccines is something called residuals, and these are just really small amounts of various things left over from the manufacturing process. And a common one of these is proteins from eggs that's used sometimes in manufacturing processes, and you may have noticed if you're getting your flu vaccine or something that they often ask if you have an egg allergy, and this is why that happens. And finally, we have the diluent, which is just what everything else swims around in, and that's almost always water, so that we can have a solution of all of these other components for a single injection. So a question for everybody is, do you think vaccines are important for pet health?
I've put this poll up on your screen, and overwhelmingly, Travis, it is a true statement.
That is great to hear. Not only are vaccines important for pet health, they're one of the most important things we can do to keep our pets healthy. So why are vaccines important for our pet health? And number one reason is that they prevent many illnesses in our pets. An example I'd like to go through here, sorry for the kind of complicated graph, but we'll walk through it. An example we like to go through here is of rabies. So we'll talk more about rabies later, but rabies is a very serious disease that usually leads to death in animals. And back in the early part of the last century, rabies was very common, with up to 10,000 domestic animals every year getting rabies. But in the 1940s in the US, we started getting really serious about vaccinating dogs against rabies. And we can see an enormous decrease in the number of rabies cases, both in animals and in people, because rabies can be spread from animals to people. to the point where now we have significantly fewer than 1,000 cases in domesticated animals every year, and significantly fewer than 10 cases in people every year. And I think this is just a really good example of how we're able to prevent illnesses in pets by having vaccinations available. In addition to stopping the actual disease itself, vaccines are really helpful at avoiding costly and unpleasant treatments for your animals. But you don't just vaccinate your animal to protect your animal. You can also protect other animals in your neighborhood, pets in your neighborhood, or even wildlife, as well as people, because many of the diseases we'll talk about in a little bit can be spread either from animal to animal or from animals to people. In many areas, certain vaccines are required. So I know that in Pasadena, all dogs and cats are required to have rabies vaccination. And depending on what activities you like to do with your pets, additional vaccines may be required. For instance, if you're trying to board a dog or a cat, or bringing your dog to daycare or to a dog park, sometimes there are additional vaccines that you'll need. Pasadena Humane offers a low-cost vaccine clinic. It is by appointment only currently, and it's drive up. So it's actually in a parking lot under the shelter, and you are able to get 4 different types of vaccines for your animals, as well as microchips. And we'll go through each of these types of vaccines that are available at Pasadena Humane. The first of these is the rabies vaccine, and this is for both cats and dogs. And it vaccinates you against the disease rabies, which is caused by the virus rabies. You've probably heard of rabies, and it is a very severe infection. So animals that are infected with rabies have very severe brain inflammation, and it can lead to very odd and aggressive behavior, especially into the urge to bite other animals, which causes the further spread of rabies. And typically it is fatal in animals. As I said, it is very commonly spread from animal to animal or animal to person. So it's really important that we try to have as high of rates of rabies vaccination as possible. And although rabies is a very serious disease, as I showed in that graph a few slides ago, the vaccines are very highly effective. And typically they last for either 1 or 3 years. So when you get your dog or cat vaccinated, make sure you know, you find out how long that vaccine is good for so that you can keep them on their schedule for their next dose. The next vaccine that we'll talk about that's offered at Pasadena Humane is the DHLPP vaccine, which is a bit of a mouthful, but is really amazing in that it's a single vaccine that can protect from 5 different canine diseases. The first of these is one of the most serious diseases it protects against, and it's called distemper. And it's a very, very serious virus that affects the respiratory, so the lung and breathing system, the gastrointestinal, so the stomach and digestive system, and the nervous system, so the brain of dogs. The infection is very often fatal, and there is currently no cure, but the vaccination is very effective against it. The H in this vaccine is hepatitis, which can cause significant liver damage in dogs and is pretty similar to hepatitis in humans in that way. The L is leptospirosis, which is a bacterial infection. And like rabies, this is an infection that can be spread to humans from dogs. The first P in this vaccine is parainfluenza, which is a highly contagious respiratory infection that actually has a lot in common with the common flu that we are used to among people. And finally, the last P of this vaccine is parvovirus, which along with distemper is one of the 2 most serious diseases that's protected against by this vaccine. It causes substantial damage to the digestive system. And unfortunately, it also suppresses the immune system. So when we had exposure to a pathogen in our cartoons earlier on, and we had those yellow immune cells come in with their magnifying glasses to figure out what's going on, and then they develop their antibodies, that whole process is slowed down and reduced by infection with parvovirus, which means that not only is your dog undergoing the challenges of parvovirus in terms of the damage it's doing, but it makes them more susceptible to other infections at the same time. And this is one of the reasons why parvovirus is often fatal. But the really good news is that all 5 of these diseases can be protected against very effectively with a single vaccine that's typically given every year. The last of the vaccines for dogs that I'll talk about is the Bordetella vaccine. So Bordetella is a bacteria that causes inflammation of a dog's upper respiratory system. And you may have heard of this disease known as kennel cough. And kennel cough can actually be caused by a few different sources, but one of those is bacteria. And among the bacteria, Bordetella is the most common bacterial cause. So if you're able to vaccinate against Bordetella, you can significantly reduce the risk of your dog getting kennel cough. If you've ever been around a dog who has kennel cough, you'll very much recognize the loud honking cough that's very distinctive and very uncomfortable for the dogs. And the reason that this is called kennel cough is because it's very easily spread between dogs. So a common location for infection is in crowded kennels or other areas where there are a lot of dogs near each other. Because it is so easy for it to be spread between dogs, this vaccination is often required for things like boarding your dog or daycare or even some dog parks. Now we're going to talk about a vaccine for cats. So we already talked about the rabies vaccine, which is also a vaccine for cats. But this FVRCP vaccine is one that's specific to cats that we don't give to dogs. And this is a single vaccine that can protect from 3 different feline diseases. So the first of those, the FVR of this, is feline viral rhinotracheitis. And it's a mouthful, but it's a virus that can lead to a severe upper respiratory disease of the lung system and increases the risk of pneumonia in cats. The C in this vaccine is calcivirus, and this is another upper respiratory infection that's also very contagious from cat to cat. And the P in this vaccine is panleukopenia, and this is a very highly contagious disease, and it's caused by feline parvovirus. So it has some similarities to parvovirus that we talked about with dogs. And the key thing to remember about panleukopenia is that it's a very commonly encountered virus. It's almost impossible to prevent your cat from ever being exposed to this parvovirus. So vaccination is really critical. And I forgot to mention this with dogs, but with kittens and puppies, so the younger animals, it's frequently required to do vaccinations it's commonly required to do vaccinations more frequently. So instead of doing a once yearly shot, it may happen a few times when they're younger. And this is because kittens and puppies don't have as strong or fully developed immune systems as adult cats and dogs. So it's especially important in young animals to be getting these vaccines and to talk with your vet about the correct vaccination schedule for them. So my question for you is, what do you think some possible side effects are?
I feel like we're going to have a variety of answers for this.
Yes, it'll be interesting to see what people choose.
So, oh, wow. I want to say that I am pleasantly surprised. One, I know everybody out there has got to vote. We're not quite at 100% vote yet, but the only answer that has been chosen, Travis, is loss of appetite, lethargy, and localized pain.
Excellent. You guys are super smart today. So that is the correct answer. And we'll walk through some of the side effects, the possible side effects of vaccination coming right up here. But it's important to remember that you always need to weigh the possible side effects with the benefits of vaccines. And side effects in general in vaccines are quite rare, and the benefits in terms of preventing the diseases are very big benefits. So even though side effects from vaccines are uncommon. Among those side effects, most of them are actually very minor. So one of the most common ones is localized pain, and this would be just some discomfort at the site of the injection, so wherever the vaccine was given. It's also relatively common to have a loss of appetite or for your animal to be lethargic. But if these sorts of symptoms seem to last longer than a day, it's worth taking your pet into a vet for an examination to make sure that there's nothing more serious going on. Also, if your pet has ever had a reaction to a vaccine before, make sure to consult with your vet before doing future vaccinations so that you can make sure everything is done in the safest way possible. Although most vaccine side effects are minor, it's possible that there could be more serious side effects. And signs that a vaccine reaction could be happening in your animal would include nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, difficulty breathing, facial swelling, hives, or itchiness. If you notice any of these reactions happening, please bring your pet to the vet or to an emergency animal hospital as soon as possible. Also, as I mentioned on the previous slide about if your pet has ever had a reaction to vaccine, if your pet has had a reaction to a vaccine, you're not able to get them vaccinated at the vaccine clinic at Pasadena Humane because you really should be having that vaccination happening in a vet's office. Finally, in very rare occasions, it's possible that there's a life-threatening allergic reaction to a vaccine. And this is usually accompanied by very immediate onset of symptoms, including diarrhea, choking, vomiting, or the animal collapsing. And in this case, you need to get your pet immediately to the vet or to an emergency animal hospital so that they can be taken care of. Okay, to wrap up what we've learned about today, we've talked about the definition of a vaccine and how it works. And we learned that a vaccine is an antigen, which is represented by our purple triangles in this diagram, that is administered to a person or animal and provides acquired immunity, which are our gray memory immune cells that have those nice Y-shaped antibodies on them, to some kind of infectious disease. And that could be rabies or parvovirus or any of the other diseases we talked about today. Vaccines are able to protect your pet from a disease without infecting your pet with the disease. And they are by far one of the most effective tools for keeping our pets safe, healthy, and happy. And I would be more than happy to take some questions.
Oh, Travis, that was very, very informative. I think I learned a little bit more today.
Excellent.
All right. So before we audience questions, I actually have one question. Can we get you back on screen?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, 1 second. There we go.
So the question that kind of came to while you were talking about this is, what causes side effects in our animals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one thing so I guess it depends on the side effect. So if we look at common ones like localized pain, that's going to be mostly just inflammation at the site where you had something injected into you. And I think we've probably all experienced this when getting a flu shot or something, that your arm is a little sore for a day or two. So that I think is mostly just inflammation from the actual like physical process of having a needle in you. Loss of appetite and being lethargic, I think that those can be symptoms of the immune response that's happening in your body. So even though the vaccine isn't infecting you with the disease, it's activating the same system that will go and try to fight that disease, and that can take away some energy from what your body would normally be doing.
Okay.
The serious side effects would probably often come from an allergic reaction to the vaccine or some component in the vaccine.
Okay. All right, we've got quite a few audience questions here. Why do animals have to get their vaccines every year?
Okay, so we have those really awesome gray cells that are giving us our memory cells. And those last for a while in the body, but we have a ton of those in our body for all sorts of different, or animals do, for all sorts of different pathogens that they've seen. And over time, you start to have fewer and fewer of the ones that your body hasn't seen for that long. So if an animal gets vaccinated for rabies 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, and they haven't actually been exposed to the rabies virus since then, their body thinks that it's not as important to keep around these antibodies for something that it never sees compared to some virus that it encounters frequently.
Okay. So do indoor cats really need both of the shots?
So that is something you should definitely talk about with your vet. Rabies is required in Pasadena and in many, if not all places in the United States. Rabies vaccine is essential. So in order to get your animal registered with the city or the county where you live. So that's definitely important. As I said, with the this FVRCP vaccine, one of the big challenges is that the parvovirus that causes panleukopenia is really, really common. It can be carried by other animals, like wild animals. You could accidentally get it on your clothing and bring it into the house, even though your cat is an indoor cat. So I think that especially for the really contagious diseases, it's definitely worth talking with your vet to see if that's the right decision for your cat.
Yeah, and I will say too, I have an indoor cat, and not too long ago, I had somebody house sitting, and they didn't engage my front door properly, and so my front door came open, and the front door was open, and the cat was curious, and he just walked outside. So I think I'm very thankful that he does have all of his shots. But if something like that were to happen to somebody else, and your cat did get one of those contagious diseases, I think it would be very devastating. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
from the pet parent perspective, like being an employee of Pasadena Humane, aside from the pet parent perspective, I think that it's better to err on the side of caution and be overly prepared than underprepared.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I hope that answers the couple of questions that came in from the audience. Let's see. Okay, so I don't know if this question was answered or not, and it says, I understand rabies is a requirement, but haven't they been given acquired immunity from their initial shots? And I think you did answer that with, it's in the memory cells, and if they don't see it every once in a while, then it's not seen as important. So if you don't keep up on those shots on the yearly basis, then it's going to go away. And if they happen to get them, be exposed to the parvovirus, or the body's going to go, the body's not going to remember it, that it's something bad. If that's kind of like in layman's terms, if I understood what you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that can happen, and I'm not sure if this is something that's done frequently with the animal vaccines, but I know with human vaccines, the viruses and bacteria that you're protecting against evolve. So when we get flu shots every year, those are actually different flu shots every year that are trying to be based on what the specific variants of flu that are around that year are. So it's possible, I don't know if this happens, but it's possible that there's, evolution of the rabies virus, and that we get better, more effective rabies vaccines every year or so, and that you're able to get even more protection for your animal.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if this is really in your purview, but because animals can contract COVID, is it possible maybe in the future that our cats and dogs will need a COVID vaccine?
I suppose it's possible. In my understanding, I don't think we frequently see like dogs and cats getting COVID. I think where I've seen it more is in like minks and other kind of less related animals. But if it becomes more of a problem in domestic, in pets, then that's definitely an option. I imagine that similar vaccine technologies could be used on animals that work effectively in people.
Okay. And then I think, so does all acquired immunity for shots only last a year, or does it last longer?
So it depends on the specific vaccine, and then it also is going to depend on just the specific animal's body. And part of having how they decide how frequently you need to get a certain vaccine is going to be on the idea that some animals' bodies are going to have a stronger immune response to it, and some are going to have fewer of those memory cells, and that I think they plan to have everybody get vaccinated with certain shots every year or every 3 years based on probably the animals who have the lower response to it, because it doesn't really hurt to upgrade your immunity to it too soon. But if for 20% of cats they don't have their immunity to calcivirus after a year, then it's useful to be giving it to all of them, because we don't have it's more expensive to figure out if you still have immunity to these diseases than it is to give immunity again.
Okay. So, and I know that you mentioned the vaccine clinic at Pasadena Humane, and just so everybody has that information, I did include a link to it in the chat box. You do need to make an appointment for the vaccine clinic, and I will tell you it is very low cost. It is $20 no matter how many vaccines you get. So you can get one vaccine, or you can get the 3 vaccines. A microchip is included in that. So this is kind of where you're really gonna get more bang for your buck.
Yes.
I know that was probably a shameless plug. Yes, and Travis had the opportunity. Yeah, go for it. Talk about it.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I had the opportunity to go to the vaccine clinic and kind of observe how everything goes, and I was really impressed with how efficient the process is right now. So you drive up with your dog or your cat, or you can even bring 2 dogs or 2 cats at the same time, and you've already pre-registered with all of your information. You go park, and they come over, and most of the time you're able to just stay in the car and hold your animal while they get vaccinated, and then it's all over and you head out. And I think it can be a pretty low stress situation for the animals and the people.
Yeah, I will say, Travis, I actually took my dog and my cat to get vaccinated a couple of weeks ago. And they, got the full gamut, so they're all current. And, they came to the car. We talked about what it was that they needed. They came back about 2 minutes later, and both of the cat and the dog stayed in the car, got their shots, and we were out all in under 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's a great system.
So, does the age of an animal make a difference in their vaccinations?
The age?
Yes.
Yes. The biggest difference is if it's a kitten or a puppy versus an adult cat or dog. And there are much more frequent vaccinations for kittens and puppies. And that's because the immune system in kittens and puppies and in human babies is much less developed than the immune system in adults. So giving it frequent exposure to the vaccine is going to help it develop stronger immune response to those vaccines. And also any of these infections would probably be a lot more serious if a kitten or a puppy got it, because their body just isn't as good at fighting off the actual disease. But once an animal is adult, I don't think that there's really a difference in how often you get vaccinated if you're, say, 3 or 10.
Okay. And is there a difference in breeds, or I don't even know if you would know this information, if certain breeds are more susceptible than others to different diseases?
I don't know that. I am not a veterinarian, but I imagine you could ask your vet that and then they would know.
Yeah, I am, and I will say that I know just from kind of speaking to our vets and hearing a lot of things that they have to say, that they're like pugs, for instance, that dogs that have flat noses are more susceptible to sinus issues just because it's harder for them to, smell and breathe because they almost have a lack of a nose. Um, but I will say we do have lots of resources on our website that can answer those questions. And we have spoken with some veterinarians on a few different occasions. And the videos to those webinars can be found on our YouTube channel. So it's just youtube.com/Pasadena Humane. And we've talked with Dr. Catch from Base Paws Cat Genetics. We've had Dr. Spies from Kenyatta Animal Hospital talk about dental diseases. We've spoken with some of our vets on pet emergencies and how to handle them. So there's lots of different resources that we have. There is a question about Bordetella, and I will say from our chief veterinarian, Dr. Matt Toscano, he has told me that, if you do take your dog to the groomers to have their teeth cleaned, to the dog parks or the dog beach, or even boarding, that Bordetella is one of the most vaccines that you can get for your dog, because there they are exposed to many other dogs and you just don't know what they have. So let's see.
Yes, absolutely. And I can say I do not bring my dog to places like dog parks and dog beaches. And early on in having our dog, she got kennel cough without having been in close contact with other dogs. So it's something that could be, just kind of in the environment. And I would recommend getting that vaccine for sure.
Okay. So actually a question for me, yay, regarding vaccine appointments. So the vaccine appointments are released on the last Sunday of the month for the following month. Right now we're sitting at August 4th, and if you've noticed that there is nothing available for August, it's because they've all been filled up. You kind of have to be quite diligent on that last day, just because it is limited availability due to COVID and our new safety protocols. So like I said, you just kind of continually keep checking the website for any updates, and sometimes appointments get canceled or they will add a day at the last minute, just depending on what the demand is. I will put an email in the chat box, but you can always reach out to our clinic with any concerns or questions in regards to appointments. It's snip@pasadenahumane.org, and they'll be able to answer more questions. So, all right, well, Travis, looking at our chat box, that was the last of the questions we have.
Excellent.
So I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and all of the knowledge you've imparted on our community.
Of course. Thank you everybody for attending. I hope that you were able to learn something today.
So, all right, well, thank you so much, Travis, and have a good afternoon.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.